Hello friends, today we are going to discuss another method of primary data collection basically, which is observation. You would remember that we have already discussed the various types of data, primary and secondary. We have discussed surveys, different types of surveys. We have discussed the uh, pros and cons of different types of surveys, plus we have also had a discussion on in-depth interviews. Apart from that, we have discussed the factors which determine the choice of survey method. Now we are moving over to observations. Again, observation is another method through which you collect primary data. Now let us understand what observations are. Recording behavioral patterns of people, objects and occurrences. So if you are recording how people behave, what behavior is displayed by objects, or you are trying to record how an occurrence is taking place, how an event is taking place, all these are examples of observation. Let us take some examples. How customers make product comparisons in a retail store. You know what a retail store is. You would recall that we have been to a retail store in Halwani, Big Bazaar. So if I want to find out how actually customers make comparisons between different brands displayed in a retail store, what will I have to do? I'll have to observe these customers while actually they have come to the retail store to make their purchase. So this can be an example of an instance where you can conduct observations. Then, why a machine is producing defective goods. If I want to find out why a machine is producing defective goods, again I can try and observe when that machine is functioning. So while this machine is running, I'll go and observe that machine so that I may get an idea about why that particular machine is producing defective goods. Let us say that I need to find out how fake news proliferates on WhatsApp. Now this is an event, some occurrence which is happening. The circulation of fake news, proliferation of fake news emanating from a source and then getting spread among the various users of WhatsApp. So this is an event. How does this event take place? What happens at first? Who sends the message? Who receives it? Who forwards it? Who reads it? Who does not read it? If I want to actually record every single thing in this particular event, that is proliferation of fake news, I will have to make observations. So in all these instances we can make observations. So observation is not about observing an individual. Many times we also observe animals also. Students of geology would be observing animals. Likewise, students of geography might want to observe what happens when there is a rainfall, and what does that rainfall do to the number of landslides that are taking place in a hilly area. So you can conduct observations in so many different fields, but you have to understand where you can use observations. It is not going to be efficient to use observations in all the instances. Now let us take an example where you can use or where you cannot use observations. See, you can use observations when the needed information can be inferred from the observed behavior. You can come to a conclusion regarding something from the behavior that somebody is displaying. Okay, I'll give an example. If you find that a boy and girl, while they are walking, the distance, interpersonal distance, is very small. So you have seen this, you have observed this behavior, you can conclude that they are either friends or maybe more intimately connected. At least they know each other. This is what you can conclude, what you can infer from this observed behavior, because we know and we have studied this also in body language that if you are intimate with somebody, the interpersonal distance tends to get reduced. If you do not know somebody, you will tend to remain at a distance from that particular individual. But if you know him well, and that is why you will find that friends generally, when they are having a chat, they will be standing close together because they are more intimately connected. They know each other and they are intimately connected, right? So just by looking at the interbody distance, you can, just by looking at this particular behavior in what is the interbody interpersonal distance that they maintain, two friends, I can conclude what is the relationship between the two, whether they are friends or whether they don't know each other, or whether they are really intimate friends, really very intimate with each other, so that I can conclude. So you go for observations when you can conclude something by observing the behavior. In those cases you observe, in those cases you go for observations. Again, you go for observation when the behavior of interest is repetitive or frequent or predictable. See, if it is not repetitive, if it is not frequent, let us say something happens once in 10 years, don't you think it is going to be a difficult task for you to go and observe it? You'll have to wait for 10 years. So if something is repetitive, it keeps on happening again and again and again and again, so you can keep on observing that particular event because it keeps on taking again and again. It is frequent, so it keeps on happening again and again, so you can make your observations again and again. So in such instances you go for observation. If the event that you are interested in is not repetitive and frequent, then it has to be predictable. Let's say I want to find out what happens when there is a solar eclipse. But please understand, solar eclipses are not repetitive frequent. They do not take place every day. They take place maybe once in 9 months, 10 months, 12 months, maybe at times once in 2 years also. So if I have to observe that, I have to know when that particular event is going to occur. That is the meaning of predictability. Otherwise, how would I know that this particular event is going to take place? And how can I prepare myself to observe that particular event? So that event, if it is not repetitive, if it is not frequent, if it is not happening frequently, it has to be predictable. You should know beforehand when that particular event is going to take place, then only you can conduct your observations. Again, you go for observation when behavior of interest is of short duration. Generally, it is going to be very difficult for you to record a behavior if it is having a long time duration. It's going to be really difficult. So you go for those instances wherein the behavior that you are interested in is of short duration. It could be 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, but it should not go on for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 hours, because then it is going to be difficult for you to record the behavior. So in such instances you go for observations. Now let us talk about the different approaches which are there. Observation can be natural observation, and it could also be a contrived observation. Now, what is the meaning of natural observation? Natural observation means the behavior is occurring naturally, while contrived means that the researcher is making the behavior to take place so that he can make his observations. So, the behavior is made to occur by the researcher. For example, if I want to find out how a boy behaves if he's slapped by a girl, so there are two approaches that I can adopt. Number one, I wait for this to happen naturally, but I don't know when it is going to take place. So it is going to be a big issue for me, because when somebody is going to slap some other individual, then only I can make the observation. I do not know when this is going to happen. So what will I do? I'll most likely go for a contrived observation wherein I'll create situations which will lead a boy to slap a girl, and then I'll make my observations. So that is the difference between natural versus contrived. Now, open versus disguised. Now, what do we mean by open versus disguised observations? Open observations are those in which the entity which is being observed, that entity knows that it is being observed. Is that fine? So open observation is wherein the entity which is being observed, and henceforth we are going to use the term subject. The subject which is being observed, that subject knows that he is being observed, but now this will create a problem. The behavior that he will display, the subject will display, would not be natural because he knows that he is being observed. So what will I do? I'll go for a disguised observation wherein the subject is unaware that he is being observed. An example is mystery shopping. Now what is mystery shopping? Mystery shopping, if you want to find out how my salespeople behave with those customers who come to the shop for buying the products. For example, let's say I want to find out how my salespersons in Maruti Suzuki dealership behave with customers who have come to the dealership to buy a car. There are two ways in which I can conduct this observation. Number one, I'll tell them, okay, I'm going to observe you when you are interacting with some customer who has just dropped in to buy a car. But this would be open observation, and since they know that they are being watched, they are being observed, they would not be displaying natural behaviors. So what will I do then? I may not, I would not tell them that I'm going to observe you and I'll pose as a researcher. They do not know that I am a researcher or that I have come there to find out how they are interacting with the customers. I'll pose as a customer, go there in the dealership and try to find out how they are behaving with the customers, how the salesperson are behaving with the customers, how they are interacting with the customers. And for that I'm posing as the customer, so they will feel that I'm the customer and they will be actually displaying their natural behavior, and this way I can find out how they are treating my customers. So this is called mystery shopping. At times we use the word ghost shopping also. Fine. Now observations can also be human versus machine. Versus machine, very simple. If you are using an observer who is a human being, then it becomes human observation. On the other hand, you can also use a machine to make observations, that becomes a machine observation. I'll give you an example of machine observations. On In your TVs nowadays we have a set-top box, and the set-top box basically is example of machine observation, because the machine is observing what? The machine is observing your TV viewing habits, whatever channels you watch, how quickly you switch from one channel to the other, what is the duration of watching a particular channel, everything gets recorded by that machine. So that is an example of a machine observation. Is this fine? Pupillometers, eye scanners, electroencephalograph and traffic counters, they are all examples of machine observation. Pupillometer checks the dilation of your pupil. Pupil is a part of eye, and it has been seen that pupil dilates when you are very excited about something. So just by looking at the dilation of your eye through the pupillometer, pupillometer will check the dilation of your eye, of the pupil of your eye. Just by finding out the dilation levels, I can understand what are the what does the what is the subject feeling. Is he excited about something? So let's say if I want to find out whether my products excite him or not, what will I do? I'll show him the product, and then I'll keep on recording the dilation of the pupil using the pupillometer, and I can find out whether my product is able to create an excitement in him or not. So this is the job of the pupillometer, which is used in market research studies. Then eye scanner basically tries to track the movement of your eyes, how your eyes move through a particular stimuli. Let's say how your eyes are moving when you are watching a particular website. If I can track that, I can find out which portion on your screen, when you are seeing the website on your screen, which portion are you going to focus more on. If I'm able to find that out, I can use that for so many different purposes. So here I can use the eye scanner. Eye scanner will basically scan the movement of your eyes. Again, we have another example of machine observation, electroencephalograph. Electro means electricity, you know already. Encephalo you means encephalo, you know what encephalo means? Basically it talks about the brain, so it is something related to brain. So if I am trying to observe what emotions get generated in my subject when he's watching my ad, what will I do? I'll basically try to observe what are the changes taking place in his mind. And how do I do that? I use some electrodes which are attached to the brain, and these electrodes will do what? They will catch the electric signals which are being produced in the mind of my subject, and this will give me an idea about how my subject is reacting to my ad or to my product. This is what an electroencephalograph does. Again, we have got traffic counters. Traffic counters are nothing but those machines which are there to keep a track of number of people visiting a particular retail store or a particular site. So that is an example of a traffic counter. So this again is an example of machine observation, because it is the traffic counter which is observing the number of people who have come to a particular retail store. So these are examples of machine observation. Another approach is called the structured versus unstructured observation. Structured observation, what happens? We have discussed structured interviews yesterday. Structured observation, in this kind of observation, what happens is this is more objective. Why? Because the observer is told beforehand as to what all things he has to observe. What all things he is going to observe, he has been told beforehand. In fact, he is given a checklist of what all things to observe, and according to the checklist he'll record his observation. So that is why it is called a structured observation. Unstructured observation will just tell him that you have to do this, you have to observe this. We don't tell him specifically what he's going to observe. You understand? Let us take an example. If I tell my observer that you only have to observe how many students were sleeping in the class while the lecture was going on, this is going to be unstructured or structured? This is going to be unstructured observation. But if I tell him, okay, you have to note down how many times did they yawn in the class, YAWN, जम्हाई कितनी बार ले रहे थे, did they yawn in the class, how many times did they try to rest their head on their hand, or how many times did they wink in the class. Now it becomes structured observation, because I have given very specific list to my observer as to what is to be observed. Now this becomes structured observation. Now one example of structured observation is the audits, because in audits you tell the auditors what all has to be observed. So these are the things that the auditors have to be observed. You tell them beforehand. In fact, you give them a checklist. So every single thing which is there on the checklist, they will observe and record. So this becomes structured observation. Now the last approach is direct versus indirect. Now what happens in direct observation? The observation only deals with the current behavior that the subject is displaying. While in indirect, what happens is the past behavior is inferred from some observation. I'll give an example. These two are examples: garbage analysis and content analysis. For example, if I want to find out what do you do with your toothpaste once the paste gets over, or what kind of food do you have in your home? Do you go for a vegetarian kind of meal, or is it generally non-vegetarian kind of a meal? I can go and observe you when you are having your food. This is going to be direct observation. Why? Because I am observing your current behavior. But I can also find out what kind of meal you have just by looking at the garbage that comes out of your household. In the garbage, naturally, if you are having egg, you would certainly find the eggshells in the garbage. Yes or no? You would certainly find. Based on that, if I infer what kind of meals do you have, that becomes an example of indirect observation, and that has been given here, garbage analysis. Another example is content analysis. If I want to find out what was the condition of women in Indian society in 1950s, what can I do? I cannot go back into the past and then do an observation. So I cannot go for direct observation there. What I can do is I can look at the movies that were released in 1950. I will look at how women were portrayed in those movies, what kind of roles were given, were women shown to be working in offices or in some leadership positions, or women were only shown to be subservient, only working in the households. Based on that, I can conclude what was the perception about women in 1950s and how women were treated in 1950s. So this would again be an example of indirect observation. Is that okay? Now let us deal with a little bit about the let us talk a little bit about the comparison between surveys and observations. We have already discussed both of them now, so this is appropriate time for us to discuss how they compare with each other. Surveys are basically meant to examine motivations and attitude. So you simply ask your respondent how does he feel about a particular thing, and you can find out what his attitude is. You can conduct in-depth interviews, yesterday we had seen, to find out what motivates an individual. But in observations, you do not actually, you cannot see attitude, you cannot see motivation. You only see the behavior, and based on that you infer, you try to conclude, you try to infer what his motivations are or what his attitude is. So that is a major difference. In surveys we are asking questions about motivation and attitude, while in observations we are observing the behavior, and based on that we are concluding about the motivation or the attitude that an individual holds. Now second difference, in surveys you can predict, you can examine future behavior, and this happens in purchase intention surveys. We may ask some respondent, okay, how likely are you to buy a car in the year 2022? So this is a future behavior that we are trying to examine. You cannot do that with an observation. You can only observe current behavior. Yes, you can infer about the past behavior by going for indirect observations. We have just seen what indirect observations are: garbage analysis and content analysis. So that we can do, but for sure we cannot examine what he might be doing in future. Observations may you can only and only observe current behavior, while in surveys you can ask him questions about his future behavior, like it happens in purchase intention skills, the example that I've quoted just now. How likely are you to buy a car in 2022? The third difference, well, private behavior can also be investigated in surveys. For example, if I want to find out how much time does an individual take to rub the soap on his body while he's taking a bath, don't you think I can ask this question while I'm conducting a survey? I can ask this question: how much time do you take to rub soap on your body while you are taking a bath? But can I go and observe that? No, we can't. We certainly cannot do that. So you cannot observe such things. Private behaviors, many times it is difficult for you to observe. It's just not appropriate for you to observe. You would not be able to observe. So I have given you an example also. Now, but then if this is the case, why don't we always go for surveys? Because naturally you can examine the future behavior also, you can examine the private behavior also. So why don't we always go for observations? I'm sorry, why don't we always go for surveys? The reason is here. In surveys we go by what the respondent is saying, but it may not correspond to what he actually does. There might be a big difference between what he's saying and what he actually does. For example, I go and ask him, how do you behave with your what do you think, how do you react to your teacher when he scolds you in the class? The respondent may very well say, no, I I take it in a very positive manner. I don't feel any animosity towards my teacher. But that may or may not be true. But in observations, generally, what the subject does, what he actually does, you will get to know that by observing him, because most of the observations, especially the case with the disguised observations, when the observer does when the subject does not know that he's being observed, you would actually see his actual behavior, and you would be able to understand his actual behavior. So rather than asking a question as to how he reacts when the teacher scolds him, what will I do? I'll see him, I'll observe him when he's actually being scolded by his teacher, and the behavior that he displays there is a closer approximation of what kind of an individual he is and what is his reaction towards the teacher. So observations many times give you a more accurate picture of the particular subject, and that is why you generally go for observations also in many of the cases. So friends, this is all in today's lecture. This is comparatively a shorter lecture, and in the next video lecture we'll be discussing experiments. Apart from that, projective techniques also will take up. Kindly keep taking down notes, and very soon we'll be having an objective test also, so please be ready for that. Thank you very much. Okay.